Hello, Team One. So, welcome. Before I hand you off to Timothy in a moment, I just want to give a brief introduction to my own first reactions to your proposal, and I will be coming back at the after Timothy speaks to give you more detailed feedback. So, the first thing I wrote on top of your proposal after I went through it was, I am truly blown away by this team's process. I mean, you did amazing, amazing work, and I'm going to go into detail about specifically why I was so impressed when we get to the end. In terms of your direction and your recommendation, I thought you had a strong intuition about the Asian market, and I think I think that's I think there's something brilliant there. That said, I realize that you converged by your own standards, but this team is not that convergent. And the thing that I first noticed when I read your presentation was that there seemed to be two different ideas that were still being meshed. One was about the fusion of Asian and Western art, or even bringing Asian opera, drawing on Asian opera. So it was about the art form in itself. And the second focus on Asia seemed to be around capturing an Asian demographic. Those are very different things. And as you'll see from your feedback from Timothy in a moment, he was really excited about one of those directions and less so about the other. Now, I should tell you that you do not have to often, the client themselves might not see the brilliance. It needs to be further developed and explained. So you don't have to take his word as gospel. That said, you should be taking all feedback, both from me and from him, seriously. So now, because you are Team One, I did not realize when I talked to Timothy that the microphone he was speaking into was not working. And so we were picking up a lot of ambient sound from my laptop speakers. So I've transcribed what he said, so you can follow along with the transcription as he speaks. He's also not on camera. It was too early in the morning, so you can listen and follow along with the transcription, and I'll be back momentarily after you hear what he has to say.
Team One, first of all, I've got to tell you, you did terrific work. I'm really impressed with the distance you went. I looked at the notes and the pictures and all the stages you went through, and I really commend you for taking this up with such vigor and pursuing it with such diligence. That's terrific. It comes to the content of your proposals, and it's a couple of interesting ideas, very interesting in fact. I want to give you a tiny bit of background. Chinese opera is a very different beast. It doesn't really connect to Western opera. So, and there isn't really an audience, or at least there has been no successful development of an audience for Chinese opera. And I say Chinese opera because it used to be called Peking opera. It was a famous place to go to see this art form. And it is, of course, it has music, of course it's on stage, and there's dancing and there's a story, but it's a very different use of those things. The same would apply in Japan, where they have a traditional theater, and you would think the curtain goes up and there are actors. But if any of you have ever seen a piece of no theater, the true thing, or kabuki, it's a very different kind of theater, and it's hard to. We've had elements of them of Asian theater art in our own works for a long time, but to do it flat out, in other words, let me try to phrase this properly, to bring an opera here that would be strictly Chinese in its form, content, and delivery, for an Asian audience that would travel to see it seems a bit odd. Why wouldn't they see it at home with more authenticity? I know in Vancouver, the Vancouver Opera has gone to great lengths to reach the Asian community, or to reach out and welcome the Asian community. It has not been especially successful. I was at a performance recently, an opera by the Chinese composer Tang Dun in Vancouver called Tea. It had trouble getting audiences, and I think because the traditions are so clear and have such allegiance in their own audiences. So those of you who know film very well will know that if you take it at its most rigorous form, what we call Bollywood movies are very different from our Western movies, even though there are lots of similarities too. But there isn't a huge Western audience for Bollywood, and unfortunately, the Western things are the ones that people want to report all the time. This brings me to another riff on your idea. When we talk about touring, in Canada, we always think about going across the country, going to a neighboring province, going south of the border. But it's interesting to me because I know there are companies in China and all over Asia that are producing Western opera, but usually by importing them. So this might be an option for Pacific Opera to extend its activity somewhat and to literally get into the Asian market. As far as the long-term traditions of audience building that you mentioned, it's certainly true if you look at the enrollment in music schools and conservatories across the country, but most particularly here on the West Coast. There's a very large Asian percentage in that population. So clearly there's an appetite and an interest in Korea, in China, in Japan for Western musical traditions. And this bodes well for the future too, because of course the parents are keen to see what their wonderful kids are getting involved in, and that could also be a way to reach a different audience. But thank you very much for these suggestions.